I have the incredible opportunity to introduce people who are doing innovative things to make sure that we are doing better. What is important is that we take some practical lessons to understand that it's not that difficult. If we want to do it, if we have the will to do it, we can make it happen. So first, I want to introduce Dana Ashley, Director of Positive Learning Collaborative, which is a joint initiative of the United Federation of Teachers and the New York City Department of Education. The collaborative focuses on building positive climates and emotional literacy in New York City public schools. Next is Christine Chavez, Principal and Advocate from New York City's PS 45 John Tyler Elementary School in Staten Island, which is one of the schools in the Positive Learning Collaborative. Next is Ken Zephyris, educator and president of Education Austin. He is an 8th grade language arts teacher for 12 years, and since leaving the classroom, he has worked to further public education through collaboration and community engagement. Currently, he's working collaboratively with Austin ISD and their community partner, Austin Voices, on a community school strategy feeder plan across 12 schools. Last is Michael Brunson, educator and recording secretary for the Chicago Teachers Union. That's right. He spent most of his time teaching in primary grades in Chicago public schools, was elected as an officer of the Chicago Teachers Union on the progressive core slate in the historic 2010 Chicago Teachers Union elections. He is currently serving as recording secretary of the Chicago Teachers Union and is actively focused on human rights, implementing restorative justice practices, the role career and technical education plays in economic development, and reversing the assaults on public education. So please give it up for our panel. Thank you. So I'd like to hear from each of you what kind of innovations has happened in your school district around reducing racial disparities, and also what led you to this shift?
All right. Hi, good morning. So I'm going to go back a little bit and talk about where I'm the director of the Positive Learning Collaborative, which is a UFT and Department of Education, New York City joint initiative. So let me just go back about 10 years. And I was a social worker in New York City in District 75, which is citywide special ed. And what we were finding in District 75 was that we were getting very high rates of referrals of kids coming to us, which was considered the last stop before jail. Kids who are cognitively able, but presenting with very challenging behaviors in their community schools. And when we would look at the information we were given about the student, we'd find, oh, they've been suspended 3 times. They had this happen, they had that happen, they were homeless, they were in foster care, they were, a whole myriad of things that happened in their lives, and very little information about what had been done to support them. And so the more we dug, the more we found that the real challenge was because we'd have teachers in classrooms who just had never been given the tools to be able to connect to kids who were very difficult at times for them, especially when you have 30 kids in a classroom. So we had concurrently been teaching a course in District 75 called Therapeutic Crisis Intervention, which is a 4-day course in understanding behavior, understanding yourself. If we don't understand and have self-awareness, understand our own triggers, if we're not able to reflect about what we're doing, how can we help our kids? So we started teaching it, but we'd have 2 people come from this school and 2 people come from that school. And what was happening was that you'd have people learning all these skills going back into an environment that wasn't able to support the skills they were learning. So as we had been learning back then and know very well now, is training alone doesn't work. Training is wonderful, but if you don't then change the environment and support the people to do the work in the environment, it's gonna keep falling flat. So fast forward years later, the UFT sort of caught wind of some of the work that was going on, and our vice president, Carmen Alvarez, of special ed, who's not here, but she's a lot is owed to her about this work. She caught wind of it, and she said, well, if you were gonna really do this, if you were gonna do it well and be able to reach more people, what would you need? I'm like, that's a big question. What would we need? Well, I want to train a whole school. I don't want 2 people from here, 2 people from there. I want to give everybody this common language and these skills and these strategies, but I need the principal involved. I can't do this without a principal. And she looked at me and she said, and you need the chapter leader. Like, okay. Now, going back years in New York City, these were not 2 entities that were communicating well, the Department of Ed and the UFT. Just put it out there. There were some major, major issues. So we thought, how are we going to do this? So we kept moving forward, and we kept finding there were ears. There were people who were open. And so we looked at it, and we ended up with about 6 participating schools to start. And we go in, and we train the entire building, starting with the principal and the chapter leader. Then we go in, and we assess the school needs. And we look at every school's an individual. It's like an individual whole person. We have to look at the school as holistically as we have to look at a student. So what were their needs in their communities? And we started connecting resources for them. We then went into classrooms and supported teachers who have been training to help actually deal with individual student issues. But the whole thing was about you got to get to know a kid. Whatever their color is, wherever they're coming from, you have to engage with who they are. And you're never going to change behavior by trying to end the behavior. You got to help the child meet those needs that they have that is causing the behavior. You have to connect to their feelings. And if you don't do that, and then have a system that supports you to do that, you're going to keep failing. I think that's the...
Great, thank you. So, Christine, before I get to you, Christine, so I just want to tell people, if you would like to submit questions, you can go to the bottom of the page. Okay, go to the closing plenary session. This is, I guess, the app. At the bottom of the page, you can submit a question or vote on a question to be asked to our panelists, and we will try to add in as many questions as we can. So, Christine.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here today. The PS45 school community, over the past year and a half, has been very, very fortunate to work with the Positive Learning Collaborative to clarify the misconceptions that many schools have, myself being one of them, that consequences change behavior. So when I met with Dana and the Positive Learning Collaborative staff and my UFT rep, we discussed what are some of the needs that my particular school was experiencing and how can we work to address those needs both on the student level and on the adult level in order to help every child be successful. So we did 3 things. We worked on building a common language of self-awareness. Self-awareness as an administrator, as a teacher, as a paraprofessional, as a school aide, down to the student level. We worked on consistent systems and structures that allowed for on-site professional development, off-site professional development, and that gave us access to a lot of resources that were experts in areas that maybe within the school community we needed some additional support in. And it helped us to build strong collaborative relationships among the students, among the staff, among the administration and the staff. And it really had such a powerful impact because the only way that any adult or any child is going to take a risk is knowing that they're being supported, knowing that they're going to be given multiple chances, and knowing that we're all in this together to make a difference for the children that are sitting in front of us every day. If you think of the continuum of learning, we all go to college and we learn that there's a continuum in reading and writing and in math. But we're not often taught the social emotional continuum, which is critical in making sure that the whole child is successful. And in making sure that we address the social emotional needs of the students, it's also important that we're aware of the adults, our social emotional needs, and how our awareness of it affects the success of the students in front of us. So we've been very fortunate and are continuing the work, but I feel very lucky to be part of the Positive Learning Collaborative and see the impact and the difference it's made with the entire school community.
Ken?
Thank you, Judith. In Austin, I think already we're starting to see that on this panel and from your comments to start, is that this is a multifaceted problem, that there's no one solution to fixing any of this. It's very complicated, yet at the same time very simple. You mentioned that relationships were broken, And before anything else, we have to start fixing relationships. We have to start mending them. We have to start communicating so that we can have better relationships and better outcomes for all people involved. In Austin, what we're doing is we're developing community schools. It's become a strategy that we've found very successful. About 7-8 years ago, we had a middle school that was struggling because of the accountability you mentioned, because testing is all-powerful and all-knowing, supposedly. And they were going to close the school. And what's the quickest way to get parents involved in a school is to say you're going to close their neighborhood school. And people came out, people from the community, leaders like Alan Weeks and folks from Austin Voices and throughout the neighborhood came forward to say, no, you're not going to close our school. And the plan of the district was not the plan of the neighborhood. And the neighborhood said, we've got a plan, we're going to develop a plan that fits our kids, our needs, and what our dreams are for our children. They put a plan together, and it was about bringing services together. It was about getting kids to school on time. It was about making sure the kids stayed in school, finding out what the real needs of the school are. Because those needs aren't found out by us talking, it's found out by us listening. And until we start listening deeply in that type of relationship, we don't understand what the needs of our neighborhoods and our communities and our kids are. And so Webb Middle School was allowed a reprieve. They were allowed a moment to actually start doing this work. Lo and behold, the community and the kids rose up. They hit the scores, albeit by a slim margin, but it doesn't matter. They hit the scores. And it gave them that space to be able to do more work, to be able to continue to work on those issues of kids leaving, of kids not showing up. What are other needs, of health needs, of academic needs? Community schools is not just a service provider model. It's not just about social services. Community schools is an academic improvement model that achieves the goal that we want for our kids. We don't just want our kids to be healthy. We don't just want our kids to get to school on time. We want our kids to succeed. We want our kids to get to 12th grade, graduate, and find a life for themselves that can then begin to break this cycle. And if we're not finding that to be our end, then all the services in the world are for naught, unless that is our goal for kids to achieve at a higher level and become productive members of our society. And that's what we find in Austin is very valuable. What we're doing is, Webb was a success. The next year, we had a high school. The feeder high school that Webb went into was going to close. They called the folks that had done the work around Webb, said, what can you do to help us? They went in with the same model. The community decided what we wanted. They didn't just want to pass the test. They wanted their school to be a college and career readiness school. They wanted their kids to go to college. 7 years later, we have kids just graduated this year from Reagan High School with 60 college credits, an associate's degree coming out of 12th grade, 20 credits, 30 credits. And this was not dictated by the district, by anybody else, but the people in the neighborhood. And it was significant because we have this partnership with Austin Voices, community members, AISD, our superintendent, Paul Cruz, people that really want to work collaboratively. And the collaboration has to occur because we communicate and we want to build relationships. Those relationships are the relationships between the union and the administration, but I think more importantly, the teacher and the student, the teacher and the teacher, the student and the student. These things work in so many different directions. We want to seem to put a lot of money into all the programs for the kids. If we're going to break this, we also have to invest and put programs and support for the teachers so they know that they can do things differently. Support them and help them to understand how they can improve in this, because we have to do this together. So just going back to what you said at the beginning, it is relationships. Community schools encompasses all of this to help our kids achieve at a very high level.
Great, thank you, Ken. Michael?
Well, let me start with a quick overview. If the student is not in the classroom, he cannot learn. So we have to, first of all, keep them in the classroom. That's the first big challenge. The second challenge that we had to deal with is if you're shutting their schools down and sending them to another neighborhood or another school, that's very disorienting. And if you are turning that school around and getting rid of the entire staff in the school, it's destabilized. It's unstable for the students. Let me go back to the first part. When I was in the classroom, I taught in some of the more challenging areas of the city. As a matter of fact, I spent 4 years teaching in the community that our president started his community service in, Argyle Gardens. Very challenging. And I noticed that, you know, when you suspend a child, they might come back a couple of days later, 5 days later, and they are not chastened. It does not really change their behavior, and it definitely does not improve their academic ability. And so personally, as a teacher in the classroom at that time, I personally tried to push back against the suspensions in my school, and I ran into a brick wall with that one because it was systemic, and that was also before we had the report released back in January 2014 about how many young black youths are being suspended and expelled. So later on, and when I came in the office as a union official, that's something that always nagged at me. What can we do about that? What can we do about that? I started working with some of the community groups that we have in the city, and all of us officers, in Chicago, we come from a community organizing background, labor organizing background, educational organizing background. Mine is a community. And I was working with parents and community groups, and they actually pushed Chicago Public Schools to change their student code of conduct to make certain offenses that were easily, that a student could easily get suspended for or expelled for. They had to switch that up and change all of the categories. So that was a pretty big win. And that in itself cut down on suspensions and expulsions. Of course, CPS took credit for it. But I have to say that if it had not been for the community and the parents working with us, or us working with them, I should say, it would never have happened. Also, since I've been in office, I'm a very strong proponent of restorative justice. Now, a couple of years ago, Chicago Public Schools adopted the theory of restorative justice, but I'll tell you right now, there's a big problem shifting from a zero-tolerance mindset to restorative justice dialogue. It just doesn't work. It takes a lot of work, once again, coming from the parents, community, coming from the teachers, and everyone that is committed to making restorative justice work.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to take moderator's prerogative and ask a few questions. So first, I guess, Michael, let's start with you just to pick up on the piece about restorative justice, because I often am in education circles, and there's a lot of, talk about restorative justice, and folks sometimes don't know what does that really mean, and what does it actually look like on a practical level in the classroom or in the school. So if you could just talk to that.
Well, let me start by saying that we want to focus on restorative practices, because the practices are what addresses the behavior before the fact. Restorative justice comes in after the fact. These are practices that, first, in order to implement a restorative justice practices and all of that, it has to be a total comprehensive system within the school. It has to start from the top down. Everyone from the administrators down through the teachers, down even to the custodians, and definitely the security, have to be well aware of what the restorative justice philosophy is. They have to be familiar with the practices. Everyone has to be in the same mindset. And then also the students have to understand why we're doing what we're doing. If that is not done, if the program is not rolled out properly, then it gets undermined and everyone begins to think it just means anything goes, okay? I won't take too long, but I will just say the main difference with the restorative justice practices and philosophy is that it's all about repairing relationships. It's not about more so punishing. It's repairing the relationships between the offender and those who were offended, so that we can go on and move on and create a more social environment.
Great, thanks. So Christine, I just want to ask you, in talking about this new work at your school. So what did it take to make it happen in the building, right? And what role did teachers play, and how did you get everybody on board?
Well, it was a process. I was a new leader to the school building roughly 5 years ago. And when I came into the school, there was a lack of trust. There was a lack of what some adults felt was discipline. And there was a lack of trust within the students and within the staff community. So in a lengthy conversation with the UFT chapter chairperson, the district chapter chair, and other teachers within the school community, we said, what are your concerns, and what can we do together, because it's a team effort, in order to be able to address this? Because if I have an idea, it's only as good as those that are working with me around it. And together, we attended the training with the Positive Learning Collaborative, with a team of 6 other teachers, and then we came back and we debriefed. And we talked about what did we think was successful, what do we think some challenges would be, and how can we make this real and bring it to life in our school community. And we developed an implementation team. And every group of teachers that went out to get trained, I have a large staff, and we sent out teachers in groups of 10. And not only teachers, paraprofessionals, school aides, we invested in everyone. Everyone heard the same language, and when everyone came back, we all said, okay, what's our next step? And the team just kept growing, and you saw that everyone felt valued, everyone felt heard, and it made a difference in their interactions with each other. It made a difference with their interactions with the students, and they were really invested in the work because it came from an idea that we discussed together.
So again, it was based on relationships.
Absolutely.
Everyone in the school building, because sometimes I do hear that people say, and I want to ask you, Dana, sometimes I've been to schools where they say, oh, we only need one person trained in this. Like, we're going to have one restorative justice person. We're going to have one person that knows PBIS. We're going to have, so tell us about why that's wrong.
Okay.
and a little bit about the support that you gave Christine.
And if I could just add, even the secretaries are trained. Everyone in the school building was trained, which is key.
So first of all, the idea that it's happened for many years within our systems, this whole idea of turnkey training. One person can do this, and one person may even go back and teach everybody else how to do it. I think, well, I always use the example that I'm not an occupational therapist. I'm a social worker. Now, I could go to a training that an OT gives and learn a lot. That doesn't make me qualified to teach what they teach. So I'm then going back trying to practice something, and on top of it, having to try to teach other people to practice something I've just am learning. I don't have the depth or the expertise of knowledge that they do. So what would happen with especially this idea of one person or another person is that they'd come into the building and you can have a school of 1,000 kids. How is one person who understands behavior and has self-awareness and is able to do this work supposed to come in and change the sort of trajectory of a school? And what we would find with that is the idea of, we have a lot of this crisis people in our schools. Well, yeah, there are always going to be situations where something really escalates, it wasn't caught earlier. But the whole idea of what preventing crisis really is about prevention. So by the time you have people coming in later after the fact and the situation is up to here, you've already had a crisis. So with a lot of the training, the work is about knowing a child and their triggers and what's going on for them from the ground up. I want to know the second that kid's face changes because something's frustrating them and how to get in there, not when they're throwing a chair across the room. It's so when we look at the work and having everybody on the same page, we also have to be able to talk about, what upsets this child? What's going on with this student? How do we help them early? And I think a lot of our system has been so reactive. It is, let's suspend them, and yet we're not getting in there to help them really early cope with their feelings because a lot of the adults aren't able to cope with their feelings. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of the battle is that we have schools in New York City especially that are very disenfranchised. We have some really low-performing schools where people are really angry and really frustrated for many, many reasons, much of them very good reasons. So you're having to take a whole school community of angry people and have them look at themselves and have them be able to do something different, the buy-in for that is struggle. But in working with Christine, I think she was 45 years, one of the first schools that signed on with us. And it was a huge leap of faith because we had just started. So it was trial and error together. But what we found was that we had to constantly look at what was working and what wasn't. And so we developed an intensive survey we do every 6 months in our schools that looks at school climate, relationships in the building. How do faculty feel about each other? How does faculty feel about administration? How do faculty feel about their ability to manage student behavior? And we kept doing it, and we kept looking and saying, okay, this is changing, or this is not changing, and let's action plan with the staff, let's get them involved. But she was open. So with your school, Christine was willing to say, you know what, I don't know everything, and I'm gonna let you see it all. Right. So she pulled it all out from under the rug, and that was huge for us.
So Ken, I wanted to turn to you on this the issue about relationships. As we have seen across the country, from August 9th when Mike Brown was killed, to Freddie Gray in Baltimore, and I could go on and on, Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old, same age as my daughter. We know that there are relationships that are broken between police and communities. And, in many places, there are communities that feel like, first of all, having police in the schools is a problem because we don't trust them on the streets. So why are they in the building, right? But that also that there are some broken relationships in the school building, right? So tell us, this piece around relationships, how do you mend them? What's been working for you all? How important is that? How do you engage the community in the work that you're doing?
Wow. It's patience. You have to be patient. You have to be persistent. Because if you're looking at what is the goal, what do you want out of a relationship, whether it's between adults and the police, whether it's kids and the adults or the administration, what is the end goal? If we allow anything to deter us from that goal, then our commitment to that goal must be questioned. I think one of the things that we've been successful in Austin is that through a lot of strife that we've had over the last 5 years, is that we continue to keep a line of dialogue open. And so if I'm not hearing where the district or the community is coming from, then I'm tone deaf. I have no business advocating. And so what we've tried to do is to take a step back. We have somewhat of a history, and I can run my mouth from time to time and get right out and take the lead on a particular issue. Sometimes it's important to be quiet, and I've learned to be quiet and to step back and to listen and to figure out what others are wanting so that we collectively can move a common agenda forward. Now, that's not as easily done as it is said. You have real serious issues when our young kids of color are being gunned down. When grown-ups, when a man can be murdered on the streets of New York and it's okay. Those things are much more difficult than just an outburst in a classroom. Right. However, if we don't figure out in the classroom how to deal with that struggle, that's the easy spot. How do you figure out that relationship with that child? How do I figure out how I'm thinking about that relationship and how I can act differently so that 5, 10, 15 years down the road, that child doesn't end up with a bullet in his back and that child isn't wrestled to the ground and strangled to death. So what are we doing now to try to be preventative of more tragic realities later? This is a long-term strategy. This is not going to change tomorrow. We have to be committed to this process, committed, patient, and persistent in pursuing our end goal, even with problems kind of derail us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, Michael, so we've seen a lot has happened in the conversation around race in the past year or so. And one of the things, there's a study by Dr. Phil Goff that shows, I think it's called the Age of Innocence or something like that. You all should read it. Phil Goff, I want you to read this study, okay? I think it's called The Age of Innocence.
Who is that again?
And it's Phil Goff, Dr. Phil Goff. Now, it's important because what it's The Essence of Innocence. Thank you. Someone shouted to me. The Essence of Innocence. I don't see you teachers writing it down. Okay, put it in your phone, tweet it. The Essence of Innocence. It's a study that shows that that he does psychological assessments, and he does a lot of work in the policing context. And what he has done, he did this study where he looked at police officers and did some tests to understand. He does that test where you look at whether or not, you look at a person and see whether or not they associate with a lion or a gorilla. And one of the things that he found was also that young black males are seen as older than they are. So 4.5 years older than they are. 4.5 years older than they are. Tamir Rice, 12-year-old in the park, gunned down by the police. Important because when you see somebody is 4.5 years older, then you accept them to accept responsibility for something that they're just a kid and they're accepting responsibility. But also that in this test, it says white women undergrads. That has implications for teachers. White women undergrads actually associate black males with gorillas at a very high rate, meaning dehumanization of young black males. And so this is important because as we have this conversation about race, and we also should be having a conversation about implicit bias, because that test is really about implicit bias, because we all have it. We walk in and we're triggered by what we see. You know, we look at Mike Brown and we say, oh, you know, Darren Wilson says, oh, he was big, Hulk-like powers. That's something that's historic. And so what's important is, as we're having this conversation and as we're, had a conversation about the Confederate flag, what should we be doing in schools and in classrooms around this conversation?
Let me give you an example. In Chicago, the student demographic is about 40% black and 45% Latino. At one time in the city of Chicago, 40% of the teachers were black, African American. That was as recent as around 2000. Now the number is down to about 20%. There has been a precipitous drop in the number of African American teachers. The number of Latino teachers has never really been that high either. It would be very helpful on a number of different planes to have a diverse teaching population that's reflective of the student population. Also, we have to look at the fact that there is a high attrition rate of teachers right now, especially veteran teachers. And I can't speak for other cities, but I know in the city of Chicago, when we lose veteran teachers, we are especially losing African American teachers. And, yes. And so many of the policies that are being implemented or foisted upon us right now lead directly to the diminishment in numbers of African American teachers in these schools. So we need to address that problem. And then, not to mention the fact that you have a high turnover of teachers coming in anyway. You have teachers coming in through these alternative programs, Teach for a While and things like that. And so,
Yeah. Amen, brother.
and we all know as teachers, it takes a while to get it down. Teaching is a science and it is an art. And after a few years, you pretty much get that classroom management thing down to an art form. But if you're only in there about 2 or 3 years and you're moving, you don't have that classroom management skills, and it's made up for by a more onerous environment where you need more security and you need all of that. You don't need that if you have experienced veteran teachers that reflect the student demographic.
Thanks. Thank you. We have one more question, and it's for you, Ken. So just so folks know, I have been using not my questions. I did go to the Twitter feed. Okay. How important is it to help change the narrative that schools are gateways or entry points to the prison? I did not write that question.
Wow. You know, this is my take on it. Of course, I'm not going to share anybody else's take. This is my take. I'm tired of rhetoric, all right? School to prison pipeline, cradle to prison pipeline, pipeline to prison, I don't care what you call it. The reality is kids of color are going to prison, and we've got to stop it, all right? That's the bottom line. And so I know that this is a delicate issue within teachers and within the union. But what I want to challenge my brothers and sisters and my colleagues in education is that we get past rhetoric. Stop thinking about what it's labeled and start thinking about what it is. And then start acting on changing what it is to a better outcome for our kids that are victims of it. And until we do that, we're just going to debate rhetoric. And I'll be frank with you, I don't got time to debate rhetoric. I've got time to change things. And that's what I want to put my energy for and forward for.
Great, thank you. So that's it. Give it up for our panel. And so just want to thank all of you and for being here and for listening to this important discussion. And as Ken would say, let's just, let's get to work on this. Thank you.